Hello, everybody. I am going to talk about chapter 25, the Baroque in Northern Europe. We already talked about the Baroque in Italy, so we're going to go up north, and this time not just north to Venice, but all the way up north to what's called Flanders and the Netherlands. So Flanders will later become Belgium. It is under Spanish rule. Actually, all the Netherlands are under Spanish rule at one point. And these places up here are very good at maritime trade. They are incredible at building ships, and that allows them to create all these trade routes. And you can see all these arrows here. They come over to North America, where the Dutch will have New Amsterdam, which will eventually fall to the English and become New York. And that's actually where we get the name for the part of New York that is Harlem. They'll go all the way down to South America, around Cape Town, around Africa, all the way over to India and China. Um, and actually, this is where they'll get tea to bring back to Europe and actually change culture there, really, if you think about the English and their tea. And in South America, they'll bring coffee. So we have them to thank for that. So we have the flip side of this is it's all this trade. They're colonizing these places, and we'll talk about that in a later chapter about this inhumane thing that is happening around the world. But nonetheless, it is a worldwide trade that they have going on there, and they are very good at building ships and map making, which of course is what you need to be good at to travel to all these places. And this you don't need to know. This is just to show you these Northerners are very proud of this industry, and many merchant class people get very rich. And we'll return to this painting later, but just to show, we'll see all these paintings with maps suddenly in them, and this is one of the reasons why. It's because this expansion is happening, and it's very exciting to these the Dutch and the Flemish, and also they're very proud because they're making a lot of money as well. Um, so the Netherlands, the whole area is under Spanish rule. However, the Spanish are Catholic, and a lot of people in the Netherlands are Protestant. And so the northern province finally get sick of the Spain harassing them, and they break off and establish the Dutch Republic. The Flanders, and we call those people who live in Flanders Flemish, will stay with Spanish rule, and they are very much tied to the Baroque of Catholic Europe. So we're talking about Caravaggio, the Italians, that kind of stuff. And by contrast, the Dutch schools will develop different kinds of subjects rather than, remember, the Protestants do not allow religious images in their churches. They do allow them in their homes, but there is a difference. They don't, think of them as things to meditate and pray to. They think of them as a moral lesson, a story to be told to remind a Protestant to lead a good life. Uh, and some of the things that will start happening is the idea of still life, genre painting, and portraits and landscape, which weren't really a big thing to do before, but now the merchants can afford these paintings, and they're going to start buying them for their own home. So they'll want some smaller subjects that would be good for the home. But we'll stay in Flanders for the first two artists. So the Flemish are Catholic. So Peter Paul Rubens, um, Peter and Paul, you can probably figure out he's Catholic by his name. Um, he is the preeminent Baroque Flemish painter. He was trained in Antwerp, but he studied all over Europe, and especially Italy, where he was highly influenced by the Italian Baroque, as it said in the first slide, namely Michelangelo and Caravaggio. And he painted for the French court. He became extremely successful and had many people working for him. So he was able to sort of crank out all of these paintings, and many of them are very large scale. So this is the raising of the cross from your chapter, and you can hopefully see the things it has in common with Caravaggio. We have the diagonal, We have the lighting, we have the drama, we have the movement, we have the moment. Those are all Italian Baroque things. But you can also see this highly figurative, muscular kind of forms that are in here, like Michelangelo. So Rubens is sort of putting together everything he's learned. And this is still, sort of counter Reformation art, whereas all this excitement and drama that he is trying to create. Remember, they're up north where things are tense because the Dutch are leaving. So they do have this desire to create this sort of moving images. And this is a gigantic triptych. And there's the centerpiece. His allegory of the outbreak of war, we see Venus pulling Mars, who's also being pulled by Ares, the god of war. And we have allegories of pestilence and famine. We have down on here, they're trampling on a broken lute and a book. This is symbolic of the first things, with when there's war, the arts go away. And this is a commentary on the 30 Years' War. So all of this sort of, drama, Baroque drama, you can see all this. But Titian does something else. He does this like strange thing with flesh that he's known for. It's called Rubenesque, where you can see like, it looks like skin folding um, when he paints it. And his giant series of Marie de' Medici, um, who became the Queen of France because she married King Henry, and she was highly unpopular in France. Um, People just did not seem to like her very much. So she commissions Rubens to come and paint this cycle of her as like arriving in France and all the things she did for France. And it is propaganda. We've seen other, leaders sort of commission things to make themselves look good. And she is doing this, with this in mind to get the public to accept her, to make her look, you know, benevolent and welcome. Um, and this shows her arrival, like she's coming off the boat right here. We have the allegory of France here, and the angels blowing their trumpets. Such a scene when she arrives, and we have the ocean and the skies all welcoming her. The other Flemish artist we look at is Charles I at the Hunt. I'm sorry, the artist is Anthony van Dyck. Charles I at the Hunt is the name of the painting. Um, Anthony van Dyck was a student of Rubens, probably one of these people who worked on many, many of his paintings, his workshop of people. Um, Van Dyck is showing the king, who is not very tall, as much taller, and he has these visual devices to help him. So he makes the horse bow down, so he's not taller than the king. He makes the trees all sort of point to the king and frame him in there. So this is what we call a framing device here. So he's lighter, he's brighter, and he's being framed in there. So he's sort of the center of the whole thing, even though he is off center. So we see artists sort of playing with this idea of composition. And we'll see another artist at the end of the chapter who does that as well. So here he is. He's twisting his body in this movement. It's a little bit dramatic. There's diagonals, so it does have some affinity with the Italian Baroque. And this is a giant painting that would have been hung a little higher so that Charles I would have literally been looking down on anybody who would come to see him. That's not very subtle symbolism there. So that was Flanders. That is the Rubens and Van Dyck are Flemish, and now we have the Dutch Golden Age, and these people will be called Dutch. They're in the Netherlands, and sometimes the Netherlands is called Holland is called the Netherlands, but this is like this whole area. Holland is just a place in it, but a lot of things just seem to happen in Holland because they have Amsterdam and Delft. They have a lot of things going on there. Um, so we have the Dutch break away from Spanish control. They are mostly Protestant, so their patrons are going to be Protestant. They are merchants, so these shippers. and most of them are middle class and the rising middle class, I should say. Some people are getting extremely wealthy off of trade, import, and export. The Dutch export linen and wool, but mostly they're importing and selling things because they're so good at shipping. They can get everywhere and have all these like very exotic things coming in to sell. And they're going to excel at genre painting. And genre painting, I think I explained in the last video, is an everyday scene where people are doing sort of domestic activities. And the first artist we're going to look at is Frans Hals. He is active in Harlem. He mostly does portraits, and he is noted for his method of painting, which is very what we call painterly. And by that, I mean you can see the brushstrokes on the canvas still. He doesn't overblend his works, and I'll show you some good examples of that. He's also important because lots of modern artists look at Frans Hals as one of the first people to do this very modern thing with paint. So this is the painting from your book, The Woman Regions of the Old Men's Home at Harlem. And he excels at group portraits. Group portraits are very popular at this time because, number one, people have money to spend, and there's lots of guilds and tradespeople that you would get together and have a group portrait. You know what this is. You've had family portraits done before, or taken them, with your phone. Um, the trick is to make it look interesting, right? This is the Baroque age, so you don't want everything to look so static. And I have some slides later on in the chapter to show you what it would have looked like before Hals and Rembrandt. But here we have these women all looking very individualized. They look very pious and humble. Some of them, don't even look out at the viewer. That's probably Hall's choice. Um, and of course, they're what they would wear, their black and white makes it look very, very dramatic and Baroque already without anything else really happening. But you can see how incredibly good Hals is at these individual portraits. But I'm going to point out this little thing that is on the sort of like cape that this woman wears, and you can see it seems to be moving. You can see brushstrokes there. It seems like it's lace, but it also seems like it's just paint. And this is the area that Halls gets into, this idea of painterliness and fine detail. The hands and the face are all, blended and very realistic and modeled in a way so they look very real. But some of the areas, like this woman's hat and this cape, do not seem very blended, as if he left them a little bit unfinished. And this is on purpose. He did not leave them unfinished. That was his style. This is the Archers of St. Hadrian, another group portrait. And I should say, if you had a group portrait with a lot of people, um, portraits, they have all kinds of documents on how they would have been charged for this. You're charged by the face and the figure. So the more people you have in a portrait, the more money you're going to make. So some of these guilds have plenty of people. We're going to see Rembrandt where it would have cost a lot of money. So mostly what they do is everybody in the portrait would pay for their own image. And then so, some of them up front probably paid extra to be in that place. But you see all this sort of movement, a little bit of drama. They're not just static. They're not standing still, layered and staring out at the viewer. Many of them stare out, some of them don't. Some of them are looking at each other. This guy looks at him. This guy, who knows where he's looking? This guy's looking down at him. So they're all very individualized. They look like specific people and they're doing very specific things. This is a little bit like the Renaissance, where we see individuals, like remember Da Vinci, The Last Supper, people acting as individuals in a realistic space. So obviously, that's not going to go away in art. It's been, you know, invented, and now artists are going to keep using it. And then where can they go from there? Well, where Halls is going to go is using paint in a different way. Um, and this one's not in your book, so you don't have to write this down. But I just have some better examples on your book to show you this idea of painterliness with this sash here, Or this guy, you can see like the hand, you can see brushstrokes right on top of it. Or the face seems to be blotches. Or this arm over here, if I cut this out, it would just be an abstract painting. It doesn't seem to be anything when you look up close to it. And this is really the direction that painting is going to go in modern art. This idea of paint being allowed to be seen as paint on a canvas. Or this one. I wish your book had put this in there because this is a great example of like what Halls can do with paint. If you really, I mean, you can just see just the brushstrokes sit right on top of everything. They're not overly blended, but when you look at it quickly, it looks as if they are blended. It makes sense. And this is going to, in the future, change into things like Impressionism or Post-Impressionism. And we'll think of Halls again when we get there. And I just love that one, so I left it in. All right, Judith Leister is a Hall's follower, just like Caravaggio. Halls has many followers, people who don't literally follow him around, but they follow his style. Um, they try to imitate it. They try to do what he's doing. And Judith Leister was very successful at this. This is her self-portrait, and we've seen plenty of other people with their canvases now. Um, we saw the portrait of Catherine, the artist. We saw Velasquez at his easel. Um, this is a thing that artists like to do to present themselves, like their business card. In Leister's portrait, though, she wears all of her finery. She was a wealthy woman of high status, and she wants to show that in her painting. Um, but hopefully, also you can see, you know, this part of the dress or her elbow, her sleeve. She's doing exactly what Halls was doing with the paint. She's leaving the paint on top and not blending it in, so that when you first glance at it, it looks like a reflection, like on her arm. But really, it's just slashes of brush mark. And you can see here as well the difference between, say, this finery of lace and the just the brush strokes. So she's walking that line like Hollis has. She's really studied what he's done. As a matter of fact, this was once I misidentified for a while as a Halls because it's so much like his style. This is sorry, that was the wrong just to show you this one here. The one of his later portraits as well. You can see he's starting to do that with the face. Sorry, that was Rembrandt's. That was in the wrong place. So this onto Rembrandt, another Dutch artist. Um, he is probably the most famous Dutch artist at this time. He has several troubles going on. His wife dies. He goes in and out of bankruptcy um, continuously. He's terrible at handling money. He likes to collect art, so he spends way too much money on buying art and not making it. But he is extremely good at portraits, and he gets a lot of big commissions. So this is the anatomy lesson of Nicholas Tulp in The Hague. And these are, it's a guild of surgeons who have commissioned this. As a matter of fact, this guy here is the mayor of Amsterdam, and they have commissioned him to paint them. But you can see what he's done is um, he, instead of lining them up like Halls just did and sort of like, okay, everybody move around and look around, he is showing them at their task. It's a lesson, so they're learning from the doctor. Um, but you can see them all in their Baroque finery. We have a diagonal, we have lighting, and it certainly is dramatic. This is very Caravaggio-like with the lighting right on him. And I said this in the Caravaggio chapter. We're going to see him influence everybody. Like there's no denying that what he did with his value is so sort of seductive to artists that many people want to use his style. Rembrandt will tweak it a little bit and kind of make it his own. This is what's called the Night Watch, I should say, and forgive me, I always call it the Night Watch, but the real title is The Shooting Company of Franz Bangkok. You are welcome to call it the Night Watch. And this is a gigantic painting. It is a group portrait of a guild. Um, let's get some details here. Oh, I want to show you this. This is the what a portrait would look like before Rembrandt or Hals. This is a group portrait, as awkward as it looks, or this one. Everybody just line up straight. There's no movement. It's sort of what you might even do with your family, right? So this is the Night Watch, this gigantic painting, and you see all of this movement, and it's called the Night Watch because it was thought that it was a night scene, but after a cleaning, it actually is not a night scene. So that's just a nickname, and that's why the other name is there. But I'll always call it the Night Watch. Um, and here's a detail of the figures moving here. The center figures. So this is a guild, and all of these people have paid for their heads to be in there. And you can see they're all sort of moving around. And Rembrandt sort of leaves a hole in the middle there. This young woman here, nobody really knows who she's supposed to be, but you can see all the diagonal and the movement. Um, it's they're all getting ready for um, the queen to visit. Is what all the it's all sort of like this chaos, like everybody running around with the two figures in the middle, just sort of standing still. And again, nobody really knows what Rembrandt. He didn't leave any documentation. There's lots of theories, but it's not really known what she is doing there. And you can see how incredibly big this painting is. This is, of course, a photo from today, recently. Um, so, this would have been a giant commission for Rembrandt to paint this. You can see it looks much lighter than in my slide here. And this isn't in your book, but just to show you that Rembrandt really um, can be very dramatic, like Caravaggio in his work. But he does something a little bit more than Caravaggio. What he's known for is he uses um, a wider range of values than the Italian Baroque, than Caravaggio. Caravaggio has a very dark darks and the very light lights, and that's how we get tenebrism. But what Rembrandt does is he uses a whole bunch of middle tones of browns and grays, but it's still on the very dark end of the spectrum as well. So we still have this drama. Um, and he does paint religious subjects. He's Flemish, or I'm sorry, he's Dutch, but it as long as it's not a devotional portrait, it's okay to tell a story, and the story should be more in lines with what a Protestant would think. So the prodigal son is the boy has left. He's taken his inheritance and squandered it through gambling and women, and he has returned to his father to ask forgiveness. So the forgiveness part will be the Protestant, and the gambling and women part is the Protestant reminder of what will happen to you if you sin. So Protestants have this little reminder of a little bit like the symbolism of, say, Van Eyck, who's also in the North, right? They use, this little reminder of how to live a good Protestant life, um, but with, sort of like showing the same stories with a dramatic new twist. Rembrandt's also known for having done dozens and dozens of self-portraits. This is his self-portrait with it's usually called just self-portrait, but self-portrait with circles. And the circles are possibly because it's said that if an artist can draw a perfect circle, that is the value of their worth, as perfect as you can make one. Um, a little bit like the Vitruvius Man in a way, right, with his arms making a big circle. And here we have him again, like Leicester, with his stuff of making art. And you can see Rembrandt also is using a very painterly style as well. And there's many, many of these. These two are from your book. This is 1658. And again, you don't need to know dates. We're just going to call this Northern Baroque is fine. You don't even have to say Dutch, but if you'd like to memorize Dutch, that's fine. And then these are just to show you. I mean, he documents himself from a young man, you know, not so young man, less young, old, right? Through his whole life. And of course, there's no phones for selfies, so this is the best you can get in all different materials, including engraving. And speaking of engraving, Rembrandt becomes very, very good at engraving. Engraving is different than, I'm sorry, etching. Etching is different than engraving. Engraving is what uh, Albert Dürer was doing. Remember that down in um, the German Renaissance? He was doing this idea of printmaking. And etching is a different type of printmaking where you use wax and acid baths to etch in the image onto the metal plate, which allows for much more gradation and texture. And this is his style. This is what he's doing in painting, and he finds a way to do it in his printmaking. Because of all of his problems with finances, Rembrandt's continuously trying to make a buck. He's, making prints means you can make a whole bunch of something with less work. So he's trying to sort of, increase his profits, even though it's said that he bid on his own work to up the prices. And just to make a difference between what Dürer was doing with his engraving, engraving is like hatching, cross hatching. It's little lines where if you have acid eating into the plate, it might have a lot more variation. And you can see here, it's much more akin to painting than engraving is. We're going to go on to Vermeer. I bet a lot of you know Vermeer or his work with Girl with Pearl Earring. It's a movie if you haven't seen it with Scarlett Johansson. Um, Vermeer is an odd character in art because he becomes very, very famous. Not much in his life because he didn't make that many works and he didn't have that many collectors because mostly one person collected most of his stuff. He kind of worked for the guy. He didn't study with a master and he didn't have any pupils, which is odd in this time period. One of the reasons why is his father was an innkeeper and an art dealer. And an inn would have, of course, a bar, a tavern. So many art shows in the Netherlands were held at taverns. That's where you would go and you could buy local paintings. You could bring them down there and sell them. It would be like a gallery in a way. And so he was around this art a lot, and he probably got an interest in it that way. He and his father were both in and out of debt throughout their lives. The Dutch economy tanked after a while and then bounced back. Um, he eventually married the daughter of a Catholic divorcee and he moved into their house. So he had lots of money problems, a little bit bankrupt, had to live with his father in law. And that's where he had 11 children. If you're interested in that, the movie talks all about that. This is his view of Delft. And you can see this very low horizon. Great use of perspective. Not a lot of atmospheric perspective. It's like all skies are crystal clear. There's beautiful reflections in the water. And we have these sort of pious, hardworking Protestants here in the foreground. This is the formula for a Dutch landscape. You have the low horizon line. You usually show the city that you're in. You would have very much civic pride, right? They're rise of the merchant class. They're very proud of themselves. This is an odd thing about the Protestants. They want to show hardworking and humility, but having pride is okay in wealth. If as long as there's a reminder of, don't have excessive pride. And that reminder in this painting is that more than half the painting is the sky, which represents heaven or God. So we have the reminder up here about the, what the Protestant life should be about. Um, and this is sort of the formula for a northern landscape. And just to show you, he's in your chapter too, Van Ruysdael, a northern painter, same exact formula, really. Right here, you have the people working the land, the hardworking people. You have the low horizon. Throw in a church as a reminder as well, a whole bunch of churches, and of course the windmills. Um, and you have this giant reminder. And I should say, clouds are a thing. Well, there are some art historians who sort of specialize in clouds, and northern clouds are always, fun to study because there's so many of them. But certainly, there's many clouds, like in the Renaissance. Think like the Sistine ceiling. Another Vermeer, a famous one, is the woman holding a balance, and we look at this and we see, a humble Protestant woman who seems to be pregnant. She does seem to have some luxury, like this fur-lined cape. She is weighing pearls, and there's money on the table. So there's the wealth, right? This is um, their indication that they are, upper middle class. They're merchants. And we have this silk here as well, which would indicate trade. The silk, the blue part here, would indicate like they have, been in the trade business, or they've accumulated goods from other places. We have a mirror here. It's probably supposed to remind the woman, that she is here on earth. Um, and then we have the reminder, like the sky and the landscape back here, and that is a painting of the Last Judgment. So that would remind this woman or the viewer, it's okay to have these things, but watch excess. Don't be fooled by the trappings of wealth, to lead a good, Protestant life. But Vermeer kind of takes the style of Baroque, Italian Baroque, and just so keenly adapts it to his own. He always has this formula of usually the windows on the left, and there's a diagonal shining on the subject. The subject is usually in the moment of doing something, even though it's not very dramatic. And then there's always some kind of little reminder somewhere about Protestants. And you can see it's a very similar formula here. We have the light from the left, the domestic. Remember, this is a genre scene. Here's the word here. This is also an allegory, this one. So it's just this artist, probably the artist Vermeer, painting his model, who is dressed as an allegory um, for the arts. So she has the music, she has the laurel, which is for the arts. He's showing his hand at perspective here with the floors, even though the Dutch do have floors like that. We have the map in the background, right, indicating trade and pride of country. This is very similar to the Arnolfini wedding portrait chandelier. Of course, that's a northern thing, a northern style. And it seems as if we're sort of peeking into the curtain, almost like a trompe l'oeil, like the fake architecture that Michelangelo uses. And this painting was one of when Vermeer died. He had 26 paintings in his studio at the time. All told, he only made about 40 paintings, so he had most of them with him. And the tax collectors and debt collectors came to collect his paintings because they needed their money. So the mother-in-law grabbed this one and said that you know she gets to keep at least this to pay off her debts. So Vermeer has a strange history with his paintings um, being stolen or misplaced. Um, he didn't do it after his death, of course. So this is the letter, um, and if you can go to the Rijksmuseum website to read about this if you want. I show this in my class, and you can really get in close detail to all these paintings here. So this is called the letter, or sometimes it's called a love letter. And we see the maid coming and bringing, this middle class woman a letter, and they look at each other sort of knowingly. Um, so it's sort of like this, almost like a secret thing, like who's this lover? It's indicating some kind of mystery. We have the lute that is symbolizing love. Sometimes it symbolizes a woman. Um, so this is like the naughtiness of it, right? This maid has stopped her duties. You can see the discarded um, broom. You can see the discarded shoes. That's probably for the woman, what she's not supposed to be doing. Again, with the curtain here. Um, and then behind them, we see two scenes. We see this calm landscape painting, and then we see sort of a storm, like the tempest that we saw. It's not the tempest, but it's like a tempest at sea, like a storm at sea. So there's an indication back here of, what kind of choices are you going to make? What kind of life are you going to lead? It's this one or it's this one, right? Depending on what the letter has to offer. Like, what is this woman going to choose? And you can see Vermeer's name right on this painting. This painting, it talks about, if you go to that website, was stolen right out of the museum. A guy hid in the electrical closet. And when everybody went home, he came out and this is in the 70s, I guess, before they had, I don't know what, they should have had cameras, I guess. Um, he couldn't, he was trying to sneak out a window and he couldn't get um, the painting with the frame on through the window. So he cut it off the frame, left the frame, got out of the museum, and he hid it in his house for a while. Then he didn't feel safe, so he buried it in the woods. And then when bad weather came, he decided he had to go get it. And they finally caught the guy with this painting, and it had been damaged some, but it's back on a different frame now. But so it has that history. It's kind of strange because Vermeer's are smaller paintings, and they're very, very valuable because he didn't make that many. And this isn't in your book, but this is called The Concert. This one's actually from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. You should read about this sometime. um, a whole bunch of paintings were stolen all at once. It was kind of a scandal. They still don't know. I think they had a break in the case last year. There's specials on it in the History Channel and things. But this Vermeer was stolen and never recovered. This is gone forever, as far as people know. So, he didn't have that many for a couple of them to be stolen. And there's a woman with girl with pearl earring. Um, Probably his model that he might have been having an affair with in the movie. This is Scarlett Johansson, but you can see the Baroque influence here. Possibly some influence of like Mona Lisa with her strange kind of smile as if she's going to speak to us. And then this one here is a beautiful painting of just like a genre scene, an everyday woman, doing her everyday task, a good, humble Protestant woman, window on the left, light cascading down in a diagonal. It's his formula. On to still life painting. There's a couple terms we're going to know. In still life painting, um, a vanitas is a vanity painting. Um, and that's what these are called. That means they must have some kind of message in them. A memento mori is a reminder of death, and a lot of them, that's the message they're going to have. So this is the one at the beginning of your chapter. Pieter Klaus, this is Vanitas. He calls it a vanity painting with Vanitas Stille. And you can see all of these things in here are going to be symbolic. We have the music, we have the upside down glass, um, we have the watch, we have the skull. These are obvious. The inkwell that's tipped over, the broken shell here. I mean, you can see the reminder of death, the skull, the clock. You can see the excess, the music, wine. Um, these are the excess, and these are the reminder of death. Like, don't do that. You want to get to heaven. And then we've seen this before too, this convex reflection. Here's the artist. You can see his easel painting the still life. So this is in the north. He probably would have known about Uh, the Van Eyck Arnolfini wedding portrait isn't the only one that uses a convex mirror. There's plenty of northern paintings that do. So he would know this tradition. So this is a typical vanitas, something that shows a still life that shows excess, and then the memento mori, the reminder of death. Well, don't, lead your life as if you want to go to heaven in death is sort of the message. And then his self-portrait is sort of like it's a time capsule. It's like, now I'll live forever. It's got that extra added thing to it. Uh, in my opinion, the most talented still life painter, if talent were skill to make things look realistic, I'm going to give the prize to Willem Kaff. This is still life with a late Ming ginger jar, and you can see the ginger jar. So, they're trading to China. This would have been an import. Lots of these things would have been imports. Glass is very expensive. So this is a show of luxury and wealth. This is, a silver platter, literally a silver platter. We have that saying now too, right? So we have this idea of excess wealth, excess food, excess drink. And then we have, the excess of, luxury goods, and then, of course, we have these reminders. Fruit is always a reminder of the Bible. And then things that are peeling and slightly rotten. The bread is a little bit moldy over here. So this is the reminder. It's like we're all going to die. We're all decaying, not to be depressing, but uh, so you need to live with temperance. That's a good kind of Protestant word to use, temperance and moderation. So the Dutch are very strange in that they're okay with having all these goods. They just call for temperance, like don't enjoy them too much, sort of thing. And these are too. I mean, this is before the camera. This is a little bit. I don't know. When I see this one on the right, I just can't even believe it sometimes. Um, that this isn't a photograph, and that Willem Kaff didn't even know what a photograph was. And this is like, I got to get one of these goblets here with this creature thing here. It's awesome. Um, Over to France, where Louis the 14th is doing all kinds of crazy things. Louis the 14th is living at the Louvre, which is his palace, and he'll want to redo that. He is going to build his little hunting lodge or redo his hunting lodge, which is called Versailles. And at Versailles, he's going to have a court of people and all his cronies and people who will want to go to court and be with Louis, and they're going to have this court culture, which is totally different than, it's like the opposite of what the Protestants are doing. It's total, chaos and sin in a way. So Louis loves art. He's a patron of the arts, and you can see this is French Baroque, right? He has the diagonal, he has the movement, he's twisted. It's very dramatic. Um, you know, uh, he Rigaud is the artist, but Louis XIV had many, many people working at court. He had people who specialized in everything. So, like, he'd have a face painter, he'd have a fabric painter, a landscape painter, whatever. So, uh, Rigaud painted the face. It said that he painted it later, and it's adhered onto this. So Rigaud kind of gets the credit for this painting, but he probably didn't do the fabric. Louis XIV is known for having um, founded the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture in France, and that's important because it's going to be state-run art. So Louis XIV and his court are going to dictate what the artistic style should be. What should good art look like? He's controlling taste, which is a very odd thing to think about. Um, he also names himself Le Roi Sol, which is the Sun King. Um, and if you took 114, there's other Egyptians that like to call themselves the Sun King, but that's where he kind of gets it. Um, So he has all these people. I already said that. So he's a 63 at the time, but he's wearing a wig and he doesn't look super young, so it's not really idealized. Um, except he fell in love with his own portrait and he never gives it to the intended recipient, which is Philip V of Spain, which is his grandson. I remember Philip IV is the guy that Velasquez is painting, um, Las Meninas. Remember that? So, um, we see the Baroque style was, with these families intermarrying and things like that. We see the Baroque style traveling as well. So this is the Louvre that is redesigned, and these are the architects. You don't need to memorize that. Um, but this is, remember, Bernini had gone to France. He was lent by the Pope, and Louis XIV didn't like his design for the Louvre. So this is what he went with, this very sort of classical repose, almost austere style compared to the rest of what his style is going to look like. He thought it just screamed class. And he builds his little hunting lodge. You can see, all of these built. This is his palace, this whole thing. And it had 2,000 acres of gardens. So we see garden architecture starting at this point as well. Probably the most famous part of the Louvre, or I'm sorry, Versailles, is the Hall of Mirrors, which is really just a hallway. Um, it's one side are windows that look over the 2,000-acre park. And the other side, I think it says 137 mirrors. I don't know if your book says it or I just know that from somewhere else. So you can imagine, and this isn't even a sunny day, how blinding this must have been, right? And then all these chandeliers reflect both sides of the light, the vaulted ceiling with all of the paintings as if he's the Pope. That's not a coincidence. Um, and the courtiers would usually line up here when Louis was coming from his private residence to, ask him for a favor. So he would sort of, rise like the sun king, and go out into the sun. It has risen, and he would greet his people, and he would either, be benevolent or he would, dismiss them. That was, it said that Louis didn't do anything for himself. If he dropped something, somebody would run to pick it up. If he needed any little thing, somebody would get it for him. He hardly did anything himself. Nicolas Poussin is a landscape painter. And of course, Poussin, he's French. And he did serve as a court painter for Louis XIII, but he spends his career in Rome. He moves and he specializes in history painting. But what he really likes to do is take history painting and put it into a landscape, like this one here in Arcadia Ego. Is whoops, I'll go back. I thought I had another slide here. Um, these figures here are quotations of like Greek classical sculptures. We have this woman here leaning on this guy. Um, and Arcadia is uh, like a nirvana. It's like an imaginary place like heaven or something. It's like the ultimate blissful place to go to. So these figures are all in there and they're pointing at this thing. I think your book says it. As I am, you will be here too, is a loose translation. I think that's similar to what it says. A reminder of death here. Even though you've made it to Arcadia, you will die. And it's said that this woman might just be an allegory for death, and they're all sort of posed, Greek classical. So Poussin is very much influenced more by, say, uh, Raphael or Michelangelo rather than Caravaggio. But we can still see, the diagonal, the lighting. You can't escape Caravaggio. So it's sort of history painting, but it's also landscape painting because he becomes very, very good at these sort of feathery trees, the atmospheric perspective, the depth. I mean, he's learned all this. He's in Rome, so he would know what Da Vinci would have done. He knows Raphael, so he's learning from the Italian masters. This is landscape with St. John on Patmos. Um, so we see a saint and a classical landscape. We have broken columns. We have an obelisk. Like this is the column all smashed. It's a ruined temple. Um, and it suggests the decay of ancient civilizations and the coming of a new Christian era, right? St. John is here. And Patmos is where John wrote the book of Revelations, which foretells the second coming of Christ. So this is a religious historical painting, right? This is the history, religion, and a landscape all mixed in together. Well, Poussin was a very uptight guy, and he came up with all kinds of formulas for how to make a perfect painting. It's almost mathematically precise. Your book gives his whole quote about like all the things he thought a painting should do, and he had an order for everything. Very not modern, I have to say. He's very classical. Is the opposite of what Halls was doing, sort of like letting his brush go loose. Poussin is very, very structured in his paintings. So here we have um, this burial scene, right? We have the figure here being carried in the foreground. When we have this framing device like the Van Eyck, you see these trees here, sort of like parentheses, keeping us into the main focus here. And also, if you can see this zigzag here, Poussin is leading us through the canvas to the back, and his formula is saying like how to move somebody sort of through a work of art. And again, with all this historical references. And that painting, I brought this in because this will be in a later chapter. That is one of the only works of art, you can see it here, in a famous Philip Johnson building in Connecticut here in the States. This is the glass house we'll look at again. And you can see from this picture here why the very rich, if you bought that painting, you're very rich to have this tiny little glass house. This is kind of an architecture experiment, if you will. Um, this wouldn't have been this is more like a weekend house. And you can see how it kind of fits in with the landscape here. This is what Johnson wanted. And certainly other people are painting different things. We have Louis Lenain, a total opposite of, say, Louis the 14th, painting this family of country people. So this is a French man, more um, you know, uh, in line with what the Dutch are doing, without showing like the luxury or the hall's merriment. Because in France, if you're not in the court with Louis, you chances are you are not very wealthy. They don't have a wealthy middle class, um, and this is going to lead to all kinds of things, including the French Revolution in the near future. And the last thing we'll look at is Christopher Wren, just to show a little architecture. This is St. Paul's Cathedral in London, a very famous building, and you can see all of his influence. This is like a Baramini, the Italian Baroque architect we looked at, and it's almost like the Michelangelo dome in Rome at the Vatican or St. Peter's. Right? It has all of the quotations here. This is English Baroque, and in general, the English don't do a lot. They're going to sort of um, come into the next chapter with other artists as well. All right, so we'll stop there. I hope this was helpful. All right, thanks.